man kneels and tells men handling swords in a store without permission to stop. The main attacker hits the seller in the stomach. He asks the shopkeeper not to judge them and says it's just research. A stranger told him the local merchants are connected to bandits. He asks to see the sword he is holding. The man noticed the sword looked like the bandits from the other day. The owner, wincing in pain, asked whether it was a common sword sold everywhere. Passers-by in the city recognized the Knights of the Order and scattered in every direction. The shop owner says an honest seller gains nothing by dealing with bandits. He suggested they check the man outside the walls, the suspicious blacksmith, instead of him. The Knights' leader asked again about the strange blacksmith, and the man confirmed everything. The blacksmiths outside the city walls are not members of the trade association. They're the kind you can squeeze information out of with a little rough treatment. A solitary blacksmith who always forges swords in complete silence seems generally creepy, and his name is Ruts. The commander hesitated, as the owner kept insisting the main character was suspicious because he hadn't registered with the guild and was likely acting behind their backs. The knight agreed, but still ordered the store owner sent to the guardhouse on suspicion of smuggling weapons with the bandits. He accused him of being the kind of person who betrays his coworkers. Then they will squeeze money out of him and give him a dressing down. Another night he asked his comrade what they should do about that suspicious blacksmith. He replied there was no point in even trying because he couldn't smell money, and he asked about touching a blacksmith behind the walls. He figured the man was probably a third-rate blacksmith with limited skills, had nothing to sell wholesale, and Ruts was forging weapons at the time. Striking the hot metal with a hammer, he shaped it into a sword. An unknown blacksmith started the story. Working hard, the young man looks intensely focused. A man falls under the spell of a strange sword. The sword will journey across the world through different eras. An elderly man rubs his beard while a young girl smiles. This sword will drive many people crazy. Ruts opened his mouth in surprise and said that everything was ready. He studies the sword carefully and decides that, although it falls short of his ideal, he has finished making it. Ruts, a young blacksmith, tossed an apple into the air and held his newly forged sword beneath it to test its sharpness. The apple split easily in half. Ruts hadn't realized how sharp the sword was. He didn't even feel the apple's weight when it was cut. It was unmatched. He admired the sword's beauty. The hero could not understand why a weapon made to kill people looked so beautiful. The weapon draws the eye. A girl's silhouette appears in the sword's reflection. Suddenly, the most beautiful girl in the world stood before him, reached out, cupped his face, and moved in to kiss him. A moment later, the girl turned into a sword. Falling to the floor, the protagonist knocked over the table holding a basket of apples and had no idea what he was doing. Ruts set the sword on a special stand and draped it with a cloth. Sitting in the chair across from the weapon, he exhaled. He thought he had done something unusual. Nothing about the sword made sense to him. An ordinary blacksmith who is not in the guild would gladly sell it, since buyers would pay a lot and he would not regret the sale. If he decides to sell it to someone, he will be shown the door immediately. If authorities consider it stolen, you could end up in prison. If you send him with the bandits, they might take him. There has to be another way. The hero doesn't know what to do, or asks how he should use this sword. Someone suddenly opened the guy's door and asked how he was doing. Ruts jumped in surprise. Claudia was the girl the young man asked to knock before going in, and he found her completely tactless. Claudia, the girl whose talk ruins her beauty, is a curious dealer who doesn't just buy from blacksmiths. The hero doesn't have many customers. The young man told the girl he was done with the orders, so she could look around as much as she wanted. The girl stroked the man's head and said she'd just made it. He probably had something handy to try. Claudia started swinging the axe. After a closer look, she said it turned out well. Ruts noted she paid close attention to quality. The girl said she was taking all the axes the man owned. She asked him to help load them into the cart. He bristled and asked why he had to. She cut him off and said she was a fragile girl. He did not want to force her to carry 20 heavy axes by herself. A man banged on the table and said Claudia was an unpleasant woman. Then she noticed the sword wrapped in cloth. She walked up to him and asked if this was his new creation. Ruts shoved it aside and said it was not for sale. She replied that whether it was for sale should first be decided by negotiations between the seller and the blacksmith. She shoved him aside and pulled the cloth off the sword. In all its glory, the weapon appeared before Claudia, and she blushed. She asked if the sword was really forged by Ruts, and he, without answering, suggested she buy a similar one elsewhere. Although he had to show it unexpectedly, as the manufacturer he wants to know. Claudia took the sword in her hands and saw how it reflected in other people's eyes. Waving it, she realized it was a good sword. It looked convincing, and holding it made her feel like a master. Retz warned her to be careful because otherwise she'd get hurt. Touching it felt like it would cut her fingers off, she said. The sword was beautiful, unlike its maker. The young man saw the girl chatting as if nothing had happened. Typical Claudia. What he saw was only an illusion. He believed he could drive people crazy. Since she's fine, it must be something else. He suddenly noticed the girl trying to kiss the sword. He grabbed Claudia and pulled her away from the sword. She fell to the floor in pain. The hero then caught the sword. She asked what he was doing and whether it was dangerous. The hero said her actions were far more dangerous. If that was what she needed, she could be angry with him. Sitting up, the girl tried to remember what she was going to do. However, she doesn't remember the last few minutes. Rutz said she would lick the blade, and he felt his guess was confirmed. This sword holds extraordinary power. Its power can captivate a person. Claudia realized the hero had no intention of selling the sword, so she asked what he planned to do with it, and he admitted he didn't know. The girl said it was hard for those who hadn't joined the guild. The young man told her to shut up and asked whether she really had no connections to handle the sword. She replied that she had none and that only a very rich man could simply buy it. The man asked the woman if the hero had a buyer for him and how much he could be sold for. The girl expected him to ask about it. It was easy to tell what the poor blacksmith was thinking. She considered the sword's price and thought of offering 50 gold coins, or 100 if the buyer was a wealthy sword enthusiast. The young man felt pleasantly surprised. He was stunned that a single sword could be used to build a house. She laughed and asked what he would do if he could not sell it. She offered to trust her with the matter. Payment would be her body. The hero asked whether her body was really worth a whole house. Laughing, she said she would need to buy 3 more swords to make the deal fair. Claudia thanked him for loading the goods, said she would come back when she found a good buyer for the sword, and added that in the meantime they would each go their own way. She said they'd meet again in 2 or 3 days. Rutz went back to the workshop. The price of 100 gold felt steep for such a sword. Although he does his job well, his skills are not improving. The sword is good too, but he can't sell it. The two are much the same. A hero smiled at the thought. He said he didn't mind if the sword didn't sell and would watch over the workshop like a guardian spirit. The main character is unusually irritated. Rutz walked down the street, swearing at Claudia. He remembered her saying they'd meet in 2 or 3 days, but a week had passed. If things were normal, she would have come for the next order by now. He hasn't had time for this since midday because there's nothing to do here but drink. The protagonist walked into a bar where the bartender greeted him and said he was doing well. The young man said the man still lacked a sense of humor. That was to be expected since he had nothing to do. The man suggested he have a drink to regain his strength. Rutz sits and wonders what Claudia is doing now. No news has come from her in a week. The bartender looks surprised. Then he said Claudia had been sent to prison, and the man choked on his drink. He couldn't believe what had happened and asked again. The bartender had heard these rumors too. Lately, the Knights of the Order had been busy fighting robbers in the streets. Rutz could not understand how Claudia was connected to them. He says the Knights tortured the bandits, who claimed ties to the city merchants and accused them of sponsoring the bandits, and then the Knights began searching the merchants, with Claudia getting caught in the crossfire. The other man finds it hard to believe that Claudia helped the bandits. The bartender says the local Knights are not much different from juvenile thieves, which is almost an accusation. The hero does not understand why they do this. He said he did not know. They claim they protect traders who pay them. The young man was outraged that it was all for money. These pathetic Knights think they can catch unsuitable traders when they are released, force them to pay for protection, and profit from it. The boy sprang up and asked what happens to anyone who doesn't pay. The man replied that they are made into servants. The hero thought he could buy Claudia for a brothel. He is shocked that they would do this for money. The bartender confirmed it and said it makes everyone angry, but no one can do anything about it. The man asked if Rutz would actually post bail for Claudia. He said he did not look like he had that kind of money, and the other man laughed, saying that if he had money from a job, he would not have been drinking since midday. Claudia sits behind bars with her hands tied in terrible conditions, cobwebs and spiders everywhere, a strange liquid in the boiler and bottles, and scraps scattered on the floor. Shocked to find herself locked in such a nasty place, the girl thinks being too beautiful is not a crime. Drinking from a bottle, she said the Knights were bad and that they should at least remove the ropes, otherwise she can't even eat normally. The sound of footsteps made her stand up. The Knight commander entered the cell and said it seemed she had not paid her tax, so they could not afford to keep another feeder. Fortunately, she is not a bad woman. A man began to look at her. He said they would sell her to a brothel, but before that he offered her the option of living as a prostitute, and now they would test her in practice. Claudia thanked them sarcastically for praising her looks and wondered how they could encroach on an ordinary city girl. If the higher-ups find out about this, it will not go well. He agreed and said they should not leave any damage on the goods. Fun can happen without leaving wounds. The man did not grab her face. He told her to be a good girl. She remained imprisoned and no one could hear her. He clamped a hand over her mouth when she tried to scream and told her to be quiet. If she bites, they will beat her until her pulse stops. Rutz burst into the cell and told them to stop. Claudio did not expect to see the guy. Tears in her eyes, she said his name. Angry, the knights demanded who he was and why he was there. The young man said he had come to look after her. He added that he had come to post her bail. The commander said the bail was 20 gold, asked how a man so poor could pay, and the man replied that he had no money. Instead, he drew a sword, the girl valued at 100 gold. To the knight's surprise, he had a sword. They also started drawing their weapons. Rutz asked them not to make him kill them. He hadn't come here to cause trouble and would give them the sword in exchange for Claudia. The girl couldn't make sense of what he was saying. This was supposed to be the most precious thing to him. The knights laughed and asked whether the sword was truly worth 20 gold coins. The hero agreed, and Claudia urged him not to act recklessly. The man swung his sword and struck. At first, nothing happened when he hit the bottle. The commander realized the man was not a threat and only wanted to negotiate, and then the bottle he had struck split in half, the top falling to the floor and leaving him surprised. The bottle didn't move at all and split cleanly into two parts. This sword cut smoothly. Rutz guessed the main gentleman was the second or third son of a poor noble. If they missed this chance, that sword would be gone, and they would likely never have another opportunity to get one like it. One of the knights said this was a truly worthy sword. He said the sword was fascinating. It must be enchanted. They would have to work their whole lives to get a sword like that. The boss admitted the sword was worth the price and told me to hand it over. But Rutz is not so simple and first told him to give Claudia, so he agreed and grabbed the girl by the scruff of the neck. Then he tossed her into the man's arms. He demanded she hand over the sword. The hero felt he was handing his good daughter to a freak. Nothing can be done about it. It must be used in combat. The man caught the sword. The knights started inspecting the sword. They were delighted. Rutz told them he had paid the bail honestly, and it should be called a sword, not a blade. Rutz and Claudia are walking through the streets. The girl smiles, and the guy thinks he's had a hard day. They walk through the markets. A vendor is selling vegetables. Tired and hungry, the young man hopes to wrap himself in a blanket and get into bed as soon as possible. She keeps following him. He turned to her and asked why she was following him, since her house was on the other side. She said she had no home, no cart, and nothing left because she had to give everything to those knights. She asked him if she could stay, but he didn't understand her. She asked why he was so worried, and he insisted he would not leave such a young lady to spend the night in a bare field, denying he'd said anything like that and letting her stay with him. Seeing Rutz in a difficult spot, the girl thought that with someone so beautiful nearby, he would hardly be able to polish his spear when needed, and the hero asked her to answer seriously. After she asked why he had helped her and even given her his precious sword, he scratched his head and said he did not understand. Throwing away 100 gold coins suggests he didn't care. Not knowing why she acted doesn't bother her. Blushing, the man looked away and said she was his seller, but the sword still had no buyer, and he didn't like how knights acted. Smiling, Claudia said she could explain his actions in a few words. Leaping down the stairs, she landed on the man's back. The boy shouted that it was dangerous. They stood on the stairs. Claudia whispered his name. She said he liked her. He suddenly started denying everything and told her not to say those things, and now he treats her differently. She couldn't stand his words and just kissed him. On the stairs, they looked into each other's eyes. The girl pulled back and walked down the stairs, looking at the guy who stood there slightly dazed. Claudia said she was truly grateful to him for his help and that they would definitely return his sword. They had better think about what she could do with her hands instead. The boy blushed. As she had said before, he could have her body in exchange for that sword. Rutz thinks about just getting out of prison, but it does not bother her, and she remembers that before he saved her, he said the sword might be useful because it had fallen into the hands of those bad people. The hero could not follow her thoughts. She said it was because the world would see his work. They will brag about his sword and others will take notice. If that happens, the higher-ups will hear about it, and and it will become a local legend. If this happens, I'll forget the knights, and one day the main knights and the highest-tier stalkers see will want to get their hands on Rhett's products. The hero said it all sounded like a waking dream. Claudia said it was not a fairy tale or a dream. A good weapon keeps passing from one owner to another. In the process, someone will definitely find out the name of the man who forged the sword. His name is Rutz. The boy likes the idea that this sword will make his name known. The man suddenly realized and screamed. When the girl asked what had happened, he croaked like a frog that had been stepped on. He said he forgot to put his name on the sword. Claudia began helping him in the workshop. His mistake means he will no longer be able to use the sword, yet with that sword's help he managed to save one human life. The hero does not regret what he gave up. Still, the protagonist felt uneasy. Waving his sword, the stranger calls this love and wonders where the artist of the masterpiece is. Hero Ricardo is the Count's favorite adventurer. The name Hero is only a pseudonym and does not mean he defeated the Demon King. Because he is powerful, he takes on eliminating particularly dangerous monsters. After defeating a new monster, he receives the expected reward but asks for weapons instead of money. Ricardo cuts through wooden targets with ease using his new sword. Pleasantly surprised, he hadn't expected the iron sword to be so light. Mr. Gayheart says he added a weight reduction spell so he can keep using it without tiring even when surrounded by enemies. The adventurer thanked the man for this wonderful gift. Joseph, a knight of the highest rank, says this is his teacher, Gerhardt, and that he is a spellcaster. Spells let you apply different effects to weapons through special rituals. The teacher is the Count's spellcaster and one of the best spellcasters in the entire country. Exhaling, Gerhard sat at the table and said he was finished. Someone opened the door to his workshop and praised him. It was Joseph. The boy assumed the new sword was for Mr. Ricardo, and the spellcaster confirmed his assumption. The old man asked the knight's opinion about the new sword, and he replied that it was excellent as always. He added that nobody would dare to doubt his skill. Joseph asked what spell he had cast on him. Gerhardt said it was a spell for weight loss. The knight wanted to speak, but the spellcaster, already anticipating his worries, said he had fixed the spell and made the sword even lighter. Given the sword's bulk, this spell is the best choice and fits Ricardo's fighting style. The man said he had thought it all through so carefully, as expected of a master. Gerhardt laughed. He added that Ricardo would be happy too. In such a short time, the spell had become much more effective. The teacher's fame would start to grow. The Count turned to Ricardo, who said he had once again successfully exterminated the monsters and had done everything he could. Count Maximilian Zander rewards the boy by giving him a sword forged by the country's best blacksmith and enchanted by Gerhardt. Grateful, Ricardo asked to examine the blade and the Count agreed, so the adventurer picked up the sword. He drew it from its sheath. A brilliant light shone from the sword. Everyone realized they had once again forged a magnificent blade. Ricardo didn't look as happy as expected, and Joseph and Gerhardt noticed. Feigning sincerity, the adventurer gave the spellcaster a routine "Thank you for this wonderful sword." Joseph didn't know what it was and wondered if the man was disappointed. Gerhardt thought Ricardo had merely repeated what he'd said before and hadn't noticed the spell had grown much stronger, so he looked at him to show he was not satisfied. A crowd gathered around Gerhardt, saying he was as incomparable as ever, and they even asked him to make a sword for them. The knight thinks the teacher will likely notice that look too. Everyone rose so quickly, but the master was clearly displeased. The old man said he had apparently made this sword out of habit. He went too far. The realization hit him when he looked at the sword with clear disappointment. The old man lacked experience. Since then, the teacher's condition has changed. Gerhardt panicked and threw his swords onto the floor, while Joseph tried to stop him. He grabbed his head and realized the spell would depend greatly on the sword's quality. An ordinary sword would need an ordinary spell. The knight knows things are bad and tries to calm the teacher down, asking him not to belittle himself like that. He has wonderful swords. Every knight would like one. Gerhardt said he froze in one place because everything suits them. Where is the Namakura, a great sword? The man asks if a teacher who consistently produces high-quality work is definitely a master of their craft. Gerhardt said a man becomes the greatest master only when he creates works the world has never seen before. Joseph fell silent. The old man fell to his knees and screamed that he would soon have to make him another sword, one that would defeat this adventurer, and that he would have to stay up at night. The old man turned toward Joseph. He asked him to bring a weapon that would awaken in him the desire to create. It must be somewhere, the perfect sword. If it exists, the man can forge the finest sword of his life. The knight was stunned. Gerhardt said he could only rely on him. Joseph walked down the street and dismissed the teacher's claim that only he could be relied on, but he did not understand what kind of ideal sword that was or whether anything like it actually existed. After pushing the thoughts aside, he is sure such a sword exists. Mr. Burbus forges the swords the teacher always uses, and as the country's best craftsman, you usually won't find better swords than his. This city is vast. Search and you'll find the sword you need. There are probably talented, unknown craftsmen here. He needs to find a great sword and a skilled craftsman. At the weapons shop, the shopkeeper said no sword was better than a Burbus. Some blacksmith said he could not do better than Burbus. The guild worker said that if the guild had such swords and skilled artisans, the city's entire weapons industry would be transformed. He checked every blacksmith in the city and found nothing. Now that I think about it, it's hard to find a good sword around here. The teacher and Mr. Ricardo each have keen eyes, and to satisfy them a sword almost counts as the needed treasure. Joseph remembered the teacher, saying the boy had to go in there. The knight sank into despair, unable to see how he could obtain such a perfect sword. Joseph sat with his head down, lost in thought. A young man interrupted him. His unexpected arrival frightened the man, who asked if his friend hadn't been taught to knock and apologized because it was urgent. A skirmish broke out at the knight's camp. They were reported waving a newly acquired sword. Joseph wanted information about the sword, so he asked what kind it was, and the man said he did not know the details and told Joseph to go see it himself. Joseph and his friend ran to the scene as fast as they could, and a man asked what they had done there. The other knights started complaining about their commander. They say he decided to take the sword they had received together. Joseph did not know what it was and had never seen a sword so thin, so he thought it might be foreign. Shouting that the sword was his, he refused to let anyone touch it. A knight shouted that they had all taken the sword together, and Joseph did not like that and asked what together meant. The knights realized the boss had heard everything. They had seized the merchants on weak charges and were forcing them to pay an unfair deposit. It occurred to him that they had stolen the sword. Joseph realized they were not even knights and wanted to confiscate their weapons. The scarred knight ordered him to be quiet. Joseph waved his sword and a beautiful girl appeared there, leaving him shocked. She wrapped her arms around the neck of the knight. His gaze was wild. The apprentice of Gerhardt, the magic caster, was surprised when a woman emerged from the sword. The knight repeated that he would not give up the sword, and his comrades tried to calm him, reminding him it was not a toy. Still trying to figure out who the ghost-like woman behind him was, Joseph watched as she appeared when he drew his sword, and the knight repeated that he would never give the sword to anyone. His eyes looked wild. The man thought the sword made him like that, and that he was obsessed with this woman. That night made the woman feel she belonged to him, that he would always be there, and she would be there for him, and he wanted to kiss the stranger. Eventually she turned into a sword again, and he kissed the sharp blade, cutting his face and leaving his comrades stunned. The other knights rushed to help him. They did not understand what he had done. He had wounded himself. The man smiled, but a cut across his cheek looked as if it had been made with a blade. Joseph was horrified. He had never seen a sword like that. Rets were made in his hand, and he was impressed. Joseph says those guys did not want to give it to him, but when he threatened to tell everyone how they make money, they agreed. The old man was fascinated by the blade that could cut a face. The student tried to stop the teacher. He had brought the sword because he thought it was suitable, but it appears to be cursed. Gerhardt soothed the student by saying he could not sense any magic from him, then showed his hands and said he wore magical tools for protection. Joseph apologized but still asked him to be careful. The old man understood him. Gerhardt drew the sword from its sheath and began to study it, unable to tell what kind of powerful blade it was. Blood was also on the blade. Joseph said that after the recent incident it was wiped down thoroughly. If left that way, it would rust. The man apologized and said he would make sure it was handled properly. The other man said stupid people shouldn't be allowed to work with swords like that. He started cleaning the sword himself. The young man couldn't read the teacher's expression because it looked both angry and pleased. Throwing himself into the work, he began sharpening the sword but kept looking at it strangely. That knight felt the same as when the man cut himself. He saw a hand emerge from the sword and wondered if it was an illusion again. He's not just sharpening the blade, he handles it as if caressing a woman. Gerhardt notices his reflection in this sword. Joseph asked whether the master was okay. The master looked very excited. He agreed and said he did not remember much of what happened, but that he understood something. He lifted his sword and called it love. The old man seemed inspired. Sir Joseph repeated what he had said about love. He seemed very unsure. Gerhardt said he felt he had created the best work of his life. Only a master can feel that, and not even the king or the Holy Father can. Joseph is glad the teacher is inspired again, since that lets him make the best sword in the world. Realizing the apprentice had led them to this sword, Gerhardt knew he had to start the ritual immediately. Gerhardt said he would cast a spell on the sword, and that it would be good if the owner came back soon. The boy wanted to stay and help the teacher. The teacher said he needed to concentrate alone. If distracted, the teacher could damage the sword. The knight asks the teacher to be careful, because he does not know what might happen with such a dangerous sword. He set the sword on a special stand, then placed the stand on a cloth painted with a special pattern. Gemstones were set into the design's sharp corners, and when the last one was placed, the sword began to glow. A powerful stream of energy flowed from the sword, able to easily consume the caster if he made a single wrong move. A girl's silhouette appeared. Gerhardt thought he might never have such an exciting task again. He asked the sword to be gentle with him. He decides to cast a spell that suits him perfectly. Reaching for a special tool, he pulls it out. Called a chisel, this device is a chiseling tool that will not harm her. Chiseling new symbols with it gives her new power. He asked the sword to bear the pain. The sword held firm. The old man remained focused. He knew that if he wasn't careful, the sword would take over his mind. The sword can easily shatter a person's mental resolve. The man wants to know what kind of person made it and why. The maker didn't even leave a name. The sword fascinates him more and more. He asks the sword not to fight back. It is not his enemy. These symbols are a command. The old man realized a stronger spell was needed to make it better. He has found the power he needs, and it should be granted to him. Outside it's night, already dark across the land, and everyone is asleep. Only the sorcerer Gerhardt is awake, working on his new creation. A few days later, after exterminating the demons, Mr. Ricardo visited the Count's residence, and the maids were taken with his beauty and strength. The maid noticed the adventurer and remarked on his looks. After fighting the wyvern, he emerged without a wound. That proves he is a hero. The girl wonders which sword the Count will give him this time. Ricardo expects the reward, this time will be another, of Gerhardt's magic swords. Grateful for the sword he received, the man cared only about swords as a collector, but the previous blade had been fairly ordinary, perhaps even a common one, and the adventurer felt disappointed. Ricardo heard someone call and froze at Joseph's gaunt face, then asked what had happened to it. The knight asked him to take the bracelet. The boy did not know what kind of bracelet it was. Gerhardt's student said that after this brilliant victory, Ricardo was entitled to a sword again. Ricardo hesitantly thanked the boy. He said the bracelet is a tool for maintaining a mental state. To possess a new magic sword, you must first put it on. Joseph nearly lost his life. The adventurer realized why he looked that way and asked what kind it was. The knight explained the sword is under a charm spell that controls even its owner and others, forcing them to carry their blades. Ricardo is surprised the sword affects him, even though he is a high-ranking knight. Gerhardt's apprentice confirmed everything and urged his companion to refuse the reward. The sword's power was terrifying. The adventurer said it was impossible. They prepared this sword just for him. If he refuses it, Mr. Gerhardt will lose face. After hearing that, he feels he cannot refuse, and his weapon-obsessed soul will not let him. Joseph expected that and told him to put the bracelet on first. Ricardo believes a man so majestic, the man who slew ranks of demons, cannot be bewitched by a mere magic sword. The Count praised Ricardo for defeating the strongest monsters, saying he had done him a great service, and calling the boy a protector of their lands and a true hero. The adventurer bristled at their praise, saying they flattered him too much, and the Count asked Gerhardt to give Ricardo his reward. The spellcaster gave the guy a strange look, making him wary. The expression made no sense to him. It came off as teasing or provocative. Mr. Joseph was fine, Gerhardt was fine too, and both of them kept staring at the sword like that. Ricardo thanked the spellcaster and thought it was all ridiculous because magic or not a sword is still a sword. He considered whether the charm spell would be useful on the battlefield. Charm only works after enemies are defeated. Joseph told him that. The man doesn't believe it's effective against enemies or monsters. The adventurer asked the Count for permission to draw his sword, and the Count allowed it. He looked at the sword and thought it wasn't promising this time either. As an adult, his reward might be only gratitude, but that mediocre sword is clearly not enough. When I open the sword, everything around lights up. The adventurer couldn't place the sweet aroma. The bracelet grew hot, and not only his hands but his whole body could not move. A hand grabbed his head. It was the woman from the sword, her gaze wild as she stared at him. Ricardo realized it was a woman and saw a sword appear beside him. Her sword matches his. Will she really make it? The stranger lifted her sword to strike. He stays still. Striking his sword, she splits the katana in two. Ricardo clutched his sword and cried out. Fear showed on his face. Regaining his senses, he looked around and breathed heavily. Those nearby were surprised, and the Count asked what had happened because the man had been screaming, unsure if he really liked the reward. The man denied it, saying the sword moved him, so much he screamed without meaning to. The Count offered to exchange the sword for another if he was not satisfied with it. He said he didn't need another sword, only this one. At first glance he knew it was a top-quality blade, but Ricardo had no idea what it was. Gerhard looked at the adventurer and gave a small smile. Ricardo was puzzled by the expression. The Count said he was right to let Gerhard choose the reward and asked the adventurer to continue protecting their lands. The exorcist sat at the table with Joseph, drinking, and asked the apprentice whether he'd seen Ricardo's blue face, which he was eager to see, and the man laughed. Joseph was shocked too. Ricardo had not pressed the sword to his throat. Gerhard asked what was wrong with that. He replied that it was very wrong. A knock sounded at Gerhardt's workshop, and the old man realized the hero had arrived. Ricardo rushes inside and asks what is going on. The man doesn't understand what the other person means. He replied that people say the sword is cursed. Garrett said nothing was forced on him. A man asked about the girl. The spellcaster realized Ricardo had also seen the owner, a ghost girl, and the guy said she would take his life, so it made no difference whether it was a curse or a ghost. Gerhardt told him not to be afraid. The girl who appeared to him was extraordinarily beautiful. Ricardo became angry. He wondered whether the sword was really that clever. The old man said the sword is too beautiful, so beautiful that anyone who sees it loses their mind. Ricardo cast a spell on it out of curiosity, and it became an incredibly powerful magical sword, which outraged him. The spellcaster offered to return the sword if the boy wouldn't use it, and would give him a plain, mediocre blade instead. Ricardo declined. Gerhardt believes that whatever the danger, a fine sword is hard to let go of, and masterpieces should be with their best owners, so this sword should belong to the strongest. After the masterpiece was completed, a new question arose. He rose from his seat, asked the boys to stop making inappropriate remarks, and told Ricardo to enjoy using the sword. Yes, both of them should follow him. He planned to ask the gentleman for a private meeting. Joseph was taken aback by how serious the question was, since it required meeting the king in person, and he did not understand what the teacher had in mind. The Count repeated his question about Gerhardt's remarks. He asked Gerhardt to spare them a little time and made the request purely in his capacity as a professional spellcaster. Hearing the master spellcaster's words, Ricardo and Joseph were stunned. The king assumed they were now unhappy with the reward. He replied that working on various interesting tasks in this castle helped him develop his skills and gain much more, and he is indebted to him. The king could not understand the old man's reasons. The old man replied that the magic sword he had just made was the finest work of his life, and he could not make anything better. To do better than this, he asks him for time to practice. Stunned that a man of his rank says he lacks skills, the Count asks Ricardo for his opinion. He said he would also need time to learn to use the sword, and could not accept another sword from the king. The Count said that if the sword's maker and its wielder prized it so highly, it would be foolish to force them. Exhaling, the man agreed to give Gerhardt time and felt inspired. The king asked him to present a worthy masterpiece if he could produce one while practicing. The old man agreed and said his humble servant was deeply grateful. The king also told Ricardo he would pay the next reward and the money. Ricardo agreed. Freed from everyday obligations, he dove straight into research. Gerhardt felt lighter. Now free, he can carry out absurd experiments. Eager to see the free spellcaster spread his wings, the man could not wait. When the old man wanted to leave, the king stopped him, and Gerhardt asked what had happened. He said he wanted one of those katanas too. Finding it easy, he asked the old man to do something for him too. All three were shocked, their mouths open in surprise. Gerhardt thinks he is opposite and an aristocrat, and even though he called it easy, that does not mean he can give him something easy to make. In this country, katanas are generally rare. Maximilian told the old man not to make his life more complicated. He wanted something light and simple. The king left and added that he would wait impatiently. He had no idea where to get a katana or where to find a blacksmith who makes one. As a result, will it be found in this country, or must it be sought in other countries? Rutz was clearing the dishes at this time. Since Claudia arrived, the food to prepare has doubled, but the helping hands have doubled too, and he's glad they came, smiling to himself. Claudia returned from somewhere and said they had work. When the hero asked her to be gentle with the door, the girl said an order had been placed for 5 daggers, costing 80 silver coins from the knight's prison. Rutz was surprised to realize she had recently been sitting there and had just shown up for work. Claudia told the man he should thank her more for the merchant's courage in coming back to such a vile place for his partner. Although grateful to her, the young man seemed reckless. She told him to calm down and said she had heard some interesting news that the knights who took the katana fought over it and said their superior confiscated it. The girl wonders who has it now. Maybe it lies in some aristocrat's sheath. The hero wants to know where his katana is now, but he has a more important concern. Lowering his katana lets him admire this smile every day. The boy looked at Claudia, who smiled brightly. Rutz felt the sorrowful sword was driving him mad. Now he wants to protect this life together with Claudia. All 4 sellers, A, B, C, and D, denied having katanas in their stores, and some did not even know what a katana was. Earhart says this same katana had an original owner, but Joseph disagreed. The man began shouting at the student and insulting him. He pleaded with him not to be angry. Gerhardt asked someone to find the blacksmith who made this katana for him. Their shouts were so loud that every passerby heard them and was surprised. Rutz told Claudia everything was ready and presented the 5 daggers he'd made. Claudia asked if it was true they would be paid 80 silver coins for them. Shocked, Rutz asked again what the price was then. She was indignant at 80 silver because you could get as much as 5 gold for something like that. Claudia insisted they could not leave it like that because the merchant himself had acknowledged the quality, but Rutz said the deal was already done. He explained that a blacksmith's skill is delivering quality within the asking price, and he does not worry about lost profits. Calling to Rutz, she confirmed they were going to sell daggers. She asked Rutz why he came with her, since she could have handled it herself. Rutz said the negotiations would be easier with the swordsman. They had already put a woman in jail on false charges. Rutz said he couldn't let her go alone. She said he cared about her too much. Claudia is worried these people might remember them. He asked him to stop, fearing they would be overheard. She suggested they just sell the goods and leave. They burst into the tavern, and the girl loudly announced she had brought the order. The men looked forward to drinks and cards, but the girl said she would show them the goods first. Ordering everyone to look at the blades, she playfully told them to raise their hands. A man drew a dagger. Its blade flashed blindingly. The men admired the dagger's gleam and were surprised to find the blades sharper than their swords. The old man suggested testing the sword's sharpness. The other adventurer angrily told him to stop because you can't point a blade at people even as a joke. The girl told Rutz they liked it, of course, because the blades were excellent. They priced the haul at 80 silver coins. Rutz's companion said they had gotten a very good deal. The same customer suddenly called out, asking them to wait a moment. Rutz and his companion turned around, surprised. The merchant asked whether these daggers were really worth 80 silver coins and said he would pay only 60 for them. The man said the sheath and the pattern were too simple. The girl asked if he wanted the price reduced and apologized, saying she was in business. Angry, the merchant said it would be ridiculous to pay so much for such a cheap item and refused to buy it unless Rutz lowered the price. Sarcastically saying, "Dear customer," the girl added that it was, of course, not the best product, but still. Rutz announced they were canceling the deal. Shocked, the merchant asked why, and Rutsu explained their agreement, saying he could not keep his word. The hero said he had worked hard to make them, and they cost 5 gold, not 80 silver. Rhett said the merchant could not value the goods, demanded a lower price, and refused to sell daggers to such a rotten person. The merchant threatened the crowd that if they listened to Rutz, they would make the blacksmith's regular work a laughingstock. Rutz shouts that these are just words fools used to justify themselves. Rutz handled the katana well and could have taken down one of them, but he knew drawing it would make the others attack immediately. Realizing he was outnumbered, the hero knew he couldn't beat them all and had to protect Claudia. Suddenly, the Rutzel people began buying his products with joy and gratitude. He could hardly believe they had paid only 80 silver coins for them. A buyer even offered to pay extra. Another suggested they should cost the full 5 gold. Claudia hugged Rutz and said it was true, explaining it was a big job for the hero and he just got carried away. Rutz had reworked and weighed everything over and over, and if they had known about it, they would have understood their value. The man said he was still negotiating. Other customers demanded the merchant take responsibility and blamed him for causing the deal to fail. The man said he had thought on everyone's behalf, and the other traders criticized him for not asking. Claudia was relieved that, despite some problems, she and Rutz had managed to sell all the daggers in the end. She said she was glad the other knights had covered that buyer, but Retz insisted it was for her own safety. She told Rutz that if he wanted to do something for her, he should give her the forged swordie. Claudia was puzzled that he had set a higher amount than they had agreed on. She said the girls liked homemade gifts, but Rutz found giving a katana to a girl strange. The heroine asked Rutz to make a sword for the girl in love, and he sheepishly asked whether she was ashamed to say that about herself. Playfully, she asked whether Retz himself was not in love with her. Pressing herself against him, Claudia asked him to do it for her. A disgruntled customer appeared and threatened we'd get into trouble if we sold him unfinished goods. She asked Rutz if that was why he was so worried this time and if his daggers were meant for her. Feeling painfully alone in the dungeon, she asked if he could understand. She admitted she was very worried she might be abused in prison. The girl said it could have ended badly, and Rhett noticed she always behaved so cheerfully. Rutz appeared earlier. A surge of feeling hit her when she realized this man had gone so far for her. Too surprised to speak, Rutz only said her name. She had been thinking about that day a lot. She asked him to make a katana and promised to give herself to him in return. All the hero could do was hope she would help later. Calling Rutz a fool, she blamed him for not understanding her at all. Put simply, she wanted to devote herself to him, and Rutz was shocked to realize it. Rutz had always thought she was beautiful, but for the first time he noticed how sweet she was. It dawned on him that she was truly thinking about him. She wanted to hug him too, and wanted it now. The old man turned to Joseph, who firmly refused. The man told him not to be so nasty, since without the sword they would not be able to start training soon. Told that no one in the city had seen a katana, the old man now hoped they would bring him some kind of magic sword. He said the katana had come to him by chance. Joseph asked whether the old man truly had no other swords like that in his collection. The old man admitted he'd had one before. Joseph said he could have given it to the count easily. Joseph asked the old man to show him the sword. Joseph confirmed it was a katana, but next to the magical one, it looked like a pathetic toy. It cannot match that first-class katana, as the old man says, and Joseph understands he must find it himself. The old man asked sarcastically whether he had forgotten to thank Joseph. The other man replied, surprised that he had not. The old man then offered him 20 gold coins as a reward. Joseph was shocked by the amount and said he could not accept it because it was too much. Muttering that he did not deserve the reward, he was interrupted by the old man, who called it shameful behavior for a knight. The old man asked what would happen if he simply said, "I want," and reminded Joseph he could have a wife. Finding the sword's maker will earn him another 10 gold, and even more if he does business with the maker. The old man asked how Joseph could provide for his son's future and start a family of his own. The young man introduced his family and understood he truly needed money to pursue his dream. They went to the prison, and Joseph asked whether they could find anything where she had appeared. Feeling he had sold himself short, Joseph decided to do it because it was for his family. The knight looked at the guards doubtfully, believing rumors of their stupidity could help his future family. Later, the man examined the strange dagger and could not tell what kind of weapon it was. Another warrior burst in, demanding to see the dagger and insisting he had bought it honestly. The warrior recognized the short blade not as cheap junk, but as a truly worthy weapon. Admiring the dagger's beauty as it glittered like treasure, he wished the same craftsman would make him a katana. Joseph asked the man where he had gotten the sample katana, and the man said it was a commission for a girl they'd arrested earlier. The man added there was a man with a woman who looked about 20 and that he was the manufacturer. Suddenly, the warrior realized his goal was within reach and pictured his wife and son, believing he would soon fulfill his mission. Seizing the man by his clothes, he demanded the couple's names, especially the girl's, while the panicked warrior shouted that he knew nothing. Joseph urgently ordered him to remember, as the warrior mumbled and struggled to recall the name. The old man calmly assumed she was Clarice, and Joseph, pleased, confirmed that this was the name of the tradeswoman he had mentioned. The young man said he visited every merchant in the city to learn her name, and though he did not find her, he learned it. The old man said the name Clarice was unknown in this country and warned that a guard's memory could not be trusted, especially when drunk. The warriors pushed for another search, sure he would find her this time, but the old man said his findings were enough. The man said he would take over the investigation from now on and go beyond the walls. Joseph explained that nobles lived inside the walls, while commoners and bandits lived outside, and he could not understand why a swordmaster would live there. The old man said blacksmith apprentices train for years, and you need experience to get work, so if Joseph became an apprentice, he would start from scratch. The man said Rutz made such a katana and believes Rutz is a master who is not in the guild. Joseph did not think the necessary equipment existed outside the walls. The warrior told Joseph there were many more people beyond the walls and that his narrow view of the world was wasting his talents. The young man wanted to check outside, but the old man refused, saying it would only hurt the blacksmith's feelings. Joseph also asked to be put on guard duty. The warrior demanded to know why someone like him needed protection. Joseph apologized, saying he had been too worried about those who devoted themselves to the sword. He gave Joseph the promised money and urged him to avoid risks and look after his family. Sometime later, the old man left the city walls and was told there was no specific place. Gather information in bars by asking traveling merchants. The warrior realized finding the one he was looking for would not be easy. A laid was urgently needed to keep the search going. He wondered how many more days it would take. Searching for someone in unfamiliar places was out of the ordinary for him and sometimes led to unpleasant moments. The man decided to widen his search to find that particular blacksmith. The old man assumed the blacksmith needed tools and hoped that would help the search, having heard something about this place. The boy said this was a lumberjack village, and the warrior realized there must be a blacksmith here who fixes axes. At the well you saw two women, and one of them said she did not know anything. One woman told the warrior to wait and asked if he meant the girl involved with the man she thought was Claudia. The old man realized her name, and the women confirmed she was the blacksmith's girl and was rumored to have taken their boyfriend. The women competed to describe how their husbands had taken axes from Claudia's boyfriend, and they were very pleased with his work. The old man asked where the girl was now. Someone told him she usually came at the same time to sharpen the axes. Assuming her boyfriend was also due to arrive today, he ran immediately toward the ringing. Seeing Rutz, the old man recognized him as the same man and noticed he was still young. He noticed the Rutz sharpen the axe in a steady rhythm without the slightest hesitation. Only a master could make that sound. The old man realized the rats were the ones he'd been looking for, but he had no other proof. Claudia appeared suddenly and said the old man had a strange sword that looked like a short dagger. Grinning, she showed the lumberjacks the shining dagger. She said it was a gift from her boyfriend and told them to look at it. The girl said they only had to look to understand everything. Her husband did more than sharpen axes. He was a first-class blacksmith. Seeing the sword's glow, the man was certain it had been made by the sword's creator. Shocked, the old man cannot believe he might be the creator of the magic sword. He is sure he made this kuchai. The old man still needed to be sure whether he had forged the katana himself or was merely a fraud. He decided he needed to see for himself how he made them. The warrior asked if she was the merchant Claudia, said they were meeting for the first time, and asked her to introduce herself. The old man said he was Gerhardt, a humble servant from the Count's arsenal, and the girl looked very surprised. Gerhardt said he had obtained a magnificent sword from the prison the day before, which explained the aristocrat's presence. Gerhardt objected that it wasn't a sword, and the girl clarified it was a katana. It dawned on the old man that she knew about the magic sword. Gerhardt confirmed he gave the sword to the Count. Claudia added the sword was later given to someone else. The nobleman admitted he was also fascinated by the sword, and he asked Claudia if she knew a blacksmith who could make katanas. The girl shouted to Rutz that an aristocrat was waiting for him, and Rutz snapped that he would not go until he finished his work. The old man noted that, although the man was rude, he clearly knew what he was doing. Claudia thought the Rutz had reacted oddly. At last, Rutz stepped up to the aristocrat and apologized for keeping him waiting. Rutz introduced himself as a blacksmith, and the old man replied that it was an honor to meet him and that he had come with a job offer. The young man asked whether the nobleman wanted to order a katana. The nobleman confirmed, but said he had a question first. He asked Rutz whether he had accidentally made the sword that ended up in the knight's hands. Rutz nodded firmly and admitted he forged that very sword. Gerhardt asked to see the boy's sword in its sheath. Rutz was surprised by the request. Rutz asked if Gerhardt wanted to make sure he had made the sword. The hero said he wanted to show him this sword, but warned the katana was of poor quality. Rutz said that simply showing the sword wouldn't be enough to convince the old man of his skill. A true master always keeps a good blade and a spare, and the old man doubted the blacksmith truly had no favorite sword. Gerhardt concluded that Rutz was simply selling good swords. He figured he had bought them elsewhere. Shock hit him as he suspected Rutz might be an imposter. Claudia held up the sword and called it a true work of art by Master Rutz. The old man told Claudia to stay calm, but she admired the sword's functional beauty, made only for killing. The blade carried a strange contradiction, and she felt a hidden kindness in it. Claudia insisted there was no contradiction because Rutz had made the sword for her out of love, but the others doubted it was really his work. The old man asked to see the sword's handle, saying it should bear the master's inscription. Claudia kindly offered to take a look, but Rutz suddenly shouted at them to wait a minute. Rutz asked me not to look and assured me there was nothing interesting there. Claudia asked whether you had forgotten to sign the sword again. The hero said the letters were in place. Claudia demanded proof it was his work. Rutz panicked and admitted he hadn't prepared the sword properly, while Mr. Gerhardt reassured him he knew how to handle swords. Gerhardt noticed the young man's excitement and guessed he was the sword's maker. Spotting the inscription on the handle, he moved closer to read it. He was sure it wasn't the blacksmith who did it, but someone else. The old man asked sarcastically if the tender message was meant for her, and she felt very embarrassed. Laughing, the girl asked Rutz what it meant. Rutz covered his face and said that was why he didn't want to show it, because he thought it was a great idea. Claudia said Rutz must love her very much. Rutz asked her to stop and not show the sign to everyone, while the old man kept chuckling quietly. Finding a love letter hidden in the handle, the old man realized only the sword's maker could have done it, and Rutz did not seem to have lied. Rutz apologized for the misunderstanding, referring to them. Now that everything was clear, the old man asked Mr. Rutz to listen to his request. He said he had another job to finish now, sharpening axes. The hero then politely asked the men to come to the workshop later. Someone asked him whether the count valued the work more. Ruther argued he would lose authority if he broke his word. First, he would keep his promise to sharpen the axes. Gerhardt understands the hero and says he will return later. Rutz will wait for him. The speaker apologized for bringing up work and asked Rutz if he could ask one question. Rutz asked, "What exactly?" When the girl asked about the sword Rutz had left with the order and who had ended up with the blade, Gerhardt understood what they were talking about. The interlocutor insisted on discussing it first, convinced the new owner would ask the same question, and Rutz was very surprised. The man said Ricardo is the sword's current owner and rightfully deserves the blade because he is considered the bravest man in the country. Gerhardt asked if Rutz felt better. After all, a coward with a sword will not become great. Rutz replied that it is a blessing for the creator when a strong warrior has the weapon. The man said the sword was now better than when Rutz first made it because he had cast a spell on it. He said the sword had become strange and demonic and seemed to bring death to everyone around it. Gerhardt doubted that Ricardo knew how to handle such a sword. Rutz feared he had done something terrible, but the man said not to worry because they only made swords. Gerhardt told him to take pride in his work, and everyone was delighted because Rutz had forged a great sword. Incidentally, Rutz was told the count also wanted a sword, and he was asked how he would respond. When asked to make a sword of the highest quality for the count, Rutz happily agreed. The man was pleased to hear a positive answer, said he would cast a spell on the sword when it was finished, and asked Rutz if he could take a look. Gerhardt observed that some people don't want others to touch their work. Rutz replied that, after all, a sword is made for the swordsman. Rutz said that if an owner finds the sword too long, he shortens the handle. Ease of use can mean the difference between life and death. The hero admitted he did not know how to mix his craft with sorcery, but he could still forge the sword to fulfill its purpose. Lament said that was great and promised to do his best and use his skills to the fullest. Rutz asked which sword the count needed. The man started to describe it. The old man said the count was not very good at martial arts, so Rutz said he would prefer a sword that was not too heavy but still looked good. Surprised, the girl called out to Rutz. She said nobles with swords were gathering, and Rutz would be left in an awkward position with a sword that was only for show. The old man agreed that whether the sword was used or not, it still had to be practical. Rutz said it should be light, beautiful, and practical, overall an excellent sword. Gerhardt asked Rutz how he would respond and whether he could forge such a sword. The old man grew angry, asking if Rutz was paying attention since Rutz was already lost in his own world. Rutz said confidently that he could do it and asked for 2 weeks to finish everything. The cat said they would see each other in 2 weeks and that he was looking forward to it. Rutz tells Mr. Gerhardt that he must be an impressive fencer and assumes Gerhardt is an excellent swordsman. Mr. Gerhardt nods sadly and says it was a long time ago. Rutz asks you to look after the sword, though he doubts he can make a worthy blade and knows it cannot be done by thought alone. The girl asked Rutz what was wrong and pressed him to answer, but he remained silent, looking thoughtful. She couldn't understand why he wasn't happy after getting the best job, and Rutz hesitantly denied it. Retz admitted he was a little nervous about dealing with a nobleman and expected his life to change completely. Claudia said the turning point had already come when Rutz threw his demonic sword at the order, and she assured him she was always ready to help. She said the main thing was his ability to work, and hoped he hadn't started all this just because of that stupid confession. Gladius claimed she had proof of his love and offered to show it. Rutz quickly refused. She regretted how easy it was to find his unsent love letter. Rutz thought he had meant to save it. Claudia said she was very glad she had found out sooner and called it very romantic. Rutz could only ask again, surprised. She said happily that she now had enough material to tease Rutz for the rest of her life. The girl told Rutz he would be late anyway, thought he should rest first, and told him to go to bed. When Rutz got upset, she said he could come to her bedroom and she would comfort him. He shouted at her to stop. Rutzide stood in his forge, thinking about her words that everything else was trivial. The hero thought Claudia was a little crazy, but her lightness and strength were something he could learn from. He remembered the client needed a sword to survive the first attack, so he needed a strong, elegant blade. Rutz knew the exact shape the sword needed. All that remained was to strike. 2 weeks have gone by. Rutz greeted Mr. Gerhardt. Mr. Gerhardt asked if Rutz had made the sword he had requested. The hero suggested displaying the sword on the street, confident that Mr. Gerhardt would want to try it. The old man admired the beautiful sword Rutz owned and was completely enchanted by its appearance. Gerhardt couldn't resist doing a few lunges, so he asked Rutz if he could try the sword, and Rutz agreed. Savoring every motion, the old man thought it a pleasure to lunge with his magnificent sword. Gerhardt said he heard the blade cut through the air and praised Rutz for making a wonderful sword. Rutz asked, surprised, what the matter was. The old man said he believed the sword was first class and expected Rutz to approve of its quality. The hero said he liked the result too, but added the blade was not finished because the sword still did not have a name. Angry, the old man cried out that it had happened again and said he had already suffered enough because the sword had no inscription. Rutz admitted he wasn't good at coming up with names. The old man said he wanted to take the sword home right away and demanded a name be chosen and engraved at once. The hero suggested calling it the Count's sword because it was made for the Count, and the old man asked him to be more serious. Claudia told the old man he was right. Claudia explained Rutz was incapable of naming things because he had no sense of beauty. She said Rutz ignores the decorations and only cares that the sword works. The girl asked Mr. Gerhardt for his opinion, suggested wind cry because the sword cuts through the wind, and he said cry would be a better word. Claudia said the name would make even demons weep beside the blade. She suggested calling the sword Demon's Lament. Gerhardt liked the name and said it was good. Holding out the bag, he said it was the money for the sword. Leaving, he shouted that if the Count liked the blade, he would bring more and was sure it would happen. The partner said she never imagined working with the Count himself. Rutz replied that it felt like a dream for him too. She said the fun part had come and suggested they check how much money they'd received, and Claudia pointed out the bag was too heavy for only 100 silver coins. The girl screamed in surprise. Rutz asked what had happened, suspecting the old man had slipped us counterfeit coins. Rutz asked whether it was true, and she confirmed the coins were gold, not silver, and that there were exactly 100 inside. The Count told them to be proud of themselves. The heroes had forged the famous sword everyone wanted. It really was worth 100 gold. The partner convinced the hero this was not a dream, and he wondered if a gold coin at the bakery would get him change. The heroes don't care what they lost that day. Gerhardt gave the decorator the sword Rutz had made. Today Rutz was due at the castle to return it. The young man begged him to sell the rare sword, shouting that he would pay any amount for it. Patrick admired the magnificent scabbard. He admitted he was in love with his work and the scabbard's fine decorations. The decorator was amazed by the sword. He knew he would regret letting it go for the rest of his life. Guessing 20 or 30 coins, he asked how much the man could pay, and the man asked Patrick how much he thought the sword was worth. Gerhardt remembered the sword had been a gift to the Count and accused the decorator of trying to steal it. Tearfully, Patrick said the sword's decorations were his great achievement and a rare feat in recent years. The older man said he understood the decorator's feelings and added that letting go of a well-made thing feels like tearing yourself apart. He asked whether Patrick really wanted to give up his honorable position as an important servant of the family and the Earl. Gerhardt told Patrick to stop whining as Patrick struggled to hold onto the weapon he wanted to take. The old man promised to tell the Count that Patrick had decorated the blade and forgave Patrick for the trick this time. The man told Patrick not to look at him like a beaten puppy and said that look was pathetic. As for it, it's not something you just hang on the wall. The old man said the sword would be wasted on someone who had never fought. Patrick quietly agreed. The Count appeared suddenly and asked if anyone could say such things about him. The Count noticed the fine weather and said he had nothing special to do, planning to rest during the day. The guard offered Sir a chance to practice with swords. Sir agreed enthusiastically and asked whether children these days could even hold a sword. The man offered to help the surrogate get in shape. Sir suddenly felt unwell and said he was not in the mood for it. The Count said he felt unwell and needed medicine, so he returned to his room and dismissed the guards for the day. Joseph said His Excellency wanted a sword and added that otherwise he would not be forced to train. The master said there was nothing to be done. He began by saying no one is born with physical strength. Joseph admitted he felt bad saying it, but the master told him not to think about it, so he focused on preparing the perfect spell technique. The warrior asked which technique he was using, and the master explained it was wind magic that made it sharper and lighter at once. Gellard said a normal blade would be unfinished, but this sword is different. Even a weak noble can wield it. It will be the finest sword. Joseph said he would watch the work too, and the master replied he would not be cursed by the sword this time. The master instructed the young man to look closely. Yelhard promised he would do his best. Joseph could hardly believe what he saw. The young man told the master it was a beautiful piece of work and added that the blade released magical power effectively. The master argued that the sword would not let him go and showed Joseph that it had withstood the power of the 5 ancient letters. Gelhard said a normal sword would break after a few strikes, but this one surpassed all his expectations. Curious to see how the sword performed, Joseph immediately offered to try it out in the yard. The young man said the swords cut through the wind and asked the master if he wanted to try a few thrusts too. Puzzled, the hero asked why the sword did not make the same sound. The master explained that the sound depends on the swing, more precisely on how the wind cuts it. Gelhard laughed at the youth and said it was no wonder he could not use a sword. Begging for another try, the boy pleaded, but the man refused to let his sweat ruin the precious gift. He said swordsmen are easily swayed by enchanted blades. Gelhard asked whether the hero would go mad and abandon his family. Joseph said he lived for his master and his family, but the master had only told him to give up. The master said the Count would be pleased with the sword, then noticed the young man looked like Patrick and asked if he felt the same. He tried to cheer us, saying one day Master Lutz would make a personal sword for us too. Joseph asked the master to add magic to the sword, but the master apologized and refused. The master said the young man could do it himself once he trained and became a master sorcerer. Someone reminded him that as the apprentice of a great sorcerer, he had to take care of his own property. The master sat in his workshop and said he had no motivation left. After the great sword, ordinary blades no longer inspired him. Ashamed of his thoughts, Gelhard decided that if the cat liked the sword, that was enough. At the reception, a guest admired the Count's sword and called it a fine piece named Demon's Lament. The Count said he'd never used it because fighting wasn't for aristocrats and weapons belonged on the wall. Silently, he apologized to the master for abandoning the sword and letting it rust, then asked for forgiveness. The old man shouted that they would not be forgiven. Realizing he was trapped in his room and stuck in useless daydreams, he cried out no in despair. Gelhard told himself to forget the sword, breathe fresh air, and gather energy to forge a new blade. He decided to design a sword he planned to make one day. The master expected it to be a sword. After all, Gelhard is not getting any younger, and the blade should be elegant but practical. The old man wanted to forge a sword like the one he'd imagined. A sudden sound caught his attention. Gelhard realized it came from the yard. Gelhard noticed a young man watching him. The man asked why Gelhard looked as if he thought it was funny that he was swinging a sword. He had just thought that. The Count praised the old man for making an excellent sword and thanked him. The master replied that thanks were not necessary. The young man admitted the sword was so good he asked himself if simply owning it made him proud. The Count asked him if he should learn fencing because, as he himself had said, a sword is not just an ornament. It was like admiring a sword without drawing it from its sheath, and he compared it to the foolishness of boasting about one's wife's beauty without ever speaking to her. The master suddenly asked to be forgiven, admitting he had acted like a snob. The Count said he had no objection. The Count reminded the old man of his own words, the sword must be held in the hands. The Count insisted on learning more about the sword, otherwise he could not be considered its owner. The sword's sound struck him as pompous, and it seemed to be praising him for the swing. Gerhardt said this was one way to think, but there was no better tool for learning. The Count wanted to try a few ideas and asked Gerhardt what he thought. Gerhardt told him to hold the sword with both hands. The young man was surprised to find that a great sword could change a person's attitude. Gerhardt pointed out that Rutz had made a good sword. Gerhardt thought Rutz's sudden laugh had destroyed his anxiety, and he was surprised. So absorbed by the training, the old man noticed how poor the Count was and said it was enough for today. Gasping for breath, the warrior thought he did not yet want to be recognized by the crying demon's sword. Gerhardt didn't expect the Count to change so much. He suggested they start by building a strong body, and when the young man apologized, the old man said it was no problem. The old man suspects the Count wants credit for the sword and wonders what happened to the man who got it the same way. Gelhard wondered whether his opponent was wielding that legendary sword now. The warrior screamed at the monster to shut up, then charged. The monster laughed cruelly and warned that if the swordsman broke his sword, the swordsman would be finished. He could hardly believe how strong this orc was and that he could not defeat him. The warrior dropped the piece into despair. Realizing the orc is twice as strong as the other two mutants, the hero admits he cannot defeat the orc. The monster spotted the warrior's second sword and ordered the warrior to draw it or be cut in half. Reluctant, the warrior hesitated. He had never wanted to use the demonic sword in battle, but he knew he would die here if he didn't. At last the warrior drew the shining blade, and the monster gasped in amazement at how incredible the sword was. The hero realized with horror that he was right. That damn woman stood beside him, smiling ominously. When she whispered into his ear, he assumed she was cursing him. The orc asked if the warrior could do any better. The man did not understand what was happening. He asked the orcs if they couldn't see the woman, unable to understand why the sword's curse did not affect them. The orc declared it would be a pity to destroy a warrior so easily and readied itself to attack. The orc leader swung his sword and shouted he would kill the man and seize the man's sword. Stunned, the warrior stared at the orc. Then he took his own life and somehow died smiling. The other orcs couldn't understand what had happened and wondered whether the sword had caused their comrade to commit suicide. Fearing the warrior's sword was cursed, the orcs panicked and fled. The man thought even the enemy's minions had fled. It became clear the enemy's strength was greater than he had thought. The warrior tried to figure out what had happened to his enemy, what this strange sword was, and whether the enemy was actually dead. The lord asked in bewilderment whether it was really a giant orc and whether it was a mutant. The man said he didn't recall mentioning mutants in the request. Gelhard replied that if they'd written the truth, no one would have come, afraid of a powerful enemy. Lord said this must be done to prevent it from happening again, and apologized to Ricardo for having to deal with it. Ricardo asked what had happened to the Count today, noticing that the Count usually listened to his reports with the eager attention of a child waiting for a fairy tale. The young man wondered whether the Count's behavior was linked to the strange figure at his side. The man asked the Count in a dignified tone how he had killed the monster. Ricardo said that when he was cornered, he turned to the demonic sword, which revealed the magical power Gerhardt had given him. The man said the sword immediately enchanted the orc, and the orc then killed himself. The Count doubted that Ricardo could even swing the sword and asked if he had anything else to say. Ricardo shouted to his lord that this power was a real curse, adding that the orc who had killed himself was smiling. Everyone was shocked when they saw the dead work. Later, the elder turned to the master and said he felt uneasy talking about the sword he had given him. Shaking with fear, the man recoiled from his sword because when he drew it, it instantly captivated both people and demons. Those standing beside him visibly tensed as the man warned the blade could wound not only enemies, but also allies and even harm its owner. The bearded man couldn't take it and raised his voice to the narrator since he already understood everything. He menacingly reminded them that no matter how the circumstances turned out, the place had saved the man's life, and it was impolite to call him demonic and terrifying after that. Furious, he kept scolding the knight and said the weapon should be thanked first. The knight was shocked to realize the old man actually wanted to force him to thank the sword. The king listened to their squabble, sighed, and expressed his agreement. Drawing his blade from its sheath, he saw the sword as the link between life and death, so every swordsman should be grateful to it, and the ruler himself showed gratitude to his war weapon. The knight did not understand their views and considered the sword only a tool. The old man told the young man that the craftsmen put their souls into each blade and that warriors trust those blades with their lives, so they are not just tools. After the old man spoke, all four stood in the throne room. The old man proudly folded his arms across his chest, turned his head away from the knight, and the king only sighed. The knight struggled to understand why the silence felt so tense and even feared he was losing his mind. Pushing the thought aside, he still found everything too strange and was confused by how emotionally attached everyone was to their weapons. Breaking the silence, the king turned to Ricardo and saw that the boy seemed to have no connection to his sword. Deciding a sword should not be nameless, the ruler told the young man to give it a fitting name and then offered him a chance to claim the blade. The name may have come from the sword master himself. The prince asked Gerhardt to write a letter of recommendation for him. Ricardo still didn't understand why a name was needed, so he got an even longer explanation that the sword is the swordsman's spirit, and a good name makes it shine brighter. Pointing his finger, the old man warned the young man that this time the blacksmith would give him a name. He wanted to know if the young man understood everything. The young man followed the map toward his destination and kept thinking something was wrong with everyone, since they looked like fools with swords and seemed controlled by their weapons, and he could not understand it. Standing at the right place, he was about to knock, but his thoughts wouldn't calm down. Though he liked blades and even collected them, treating them like people was not for him. The boy decided he would never be such a fool with a sword. A girl opened the door, stepped in front of him, and asked the knight who he was. The young man thought it very beautiful, but only asked aloud whether it was Master Lutz's workshop, the man who had made his sword. The mistress's eyes widened when she looked at the blade. Turning, she shouted into the house, telling everyone that the sword had come home and its owner, the hero, was there. Ricardo was surprised to see the master was younger than he expected, and the master smiled when he recognized his weapon. The blacksmith immediately understood the reason for the visit and had to name the cursed sword. She added that if they saw an orc with the same expression, ready to end his life, she would be shocked and traumatized, and the men did not understand her words at all. Ricardo said he had never seen a death this horrific. The blade could even make its owner hallucinate. The master had created a truly terrible weapon. Being praised like that made him feel awkward and embarrassed. Grabbing his head, the young man made it clear this was not a compliment, unable to see what was wrong with the blacksmith, who proved as stupid as everyone else. The girl asked the man what kind of hallucinations he was having. The knight said it was a woman and that his imagination was not his. The master knew this, and his companion asked him to tell her more. With nowhere to go, he said that as soon as he drew his sword, a sweet scent filled the air, and the next moment he noticed a bleeding girl standing behind him who found the knight very creepy. Ricardo feared that if he relaxed his guard for even a moment, he would be cursed to die. The master said he had suspected as much because of the girl spilling blood. A sudden idea struck the blacksmith. He seemed to have a fitting name, but the girl stopped him, afraid he had thought of something like Bleeding Girl. Sullen, the man listened to their squabble. The master was angry that his companion had not given him a chance, but the girl remained firm in her decision. She was almost certain that if Lutz said the name, their ears would immediately wither. Taking the sword, she repeated the knight's words about visions of a sweet-smelling woman. He seemed to mean the weapon itself was a girl. Watching her, the young man thought that even a beautiful woman treated a sword like a person, and he wondered if it could really have sexual characteristics. She suggested the name Tsubaki, camellia, the name of a flower, so it was perfect for a woman. Ricardo considered the suggestion, but it seemed too refined for a demonic sword. Let's disagree. The chameleon was a flower that shed the hole in its petal all at once. He believed the flower's grace perfectly matched the blade's beauty. Nothing else came to mind when he asked the knight for other suitable ideas, so camellia was probably the best fit. The blacksmith picked up the sword, the name was decided, and it had to be written down as soon as possible. A man tried to stop him, but he had pulled out his weapon too recklessly. It must be kept in special conditions. The young man offered the master a special object, but the master did not accept it. The young man was sure the blade would not harm him. Knight doubted it since the blacksmith could not know for sure, but others assured him it was because he had created it, and Ricardo was angry at how strange the people here were. He could not understand why everyone loved and believed in the demonic sword more than its owner. The blacksmith raised his hammer to start work, then paused when he realized the blade was under heavy pressure. A terrifying vision of a woman appeared behind him. Her hands shot to the man's neck. The blacksmith felt the girl behind him at once without turning. If he looked back, she would strangle him immediately, or he would strangle her himself. Despite it all, the master was not afraid of her and even felt grateful. The woman saved Klaus's life and brought lots of connections. It had all started with her, and he thanked her again. The blood stains in the girl's sinister expression faded from her face. The blacksmith recognized how far she had come, and to show his gratitude, gave her the name Tsubaki, carving the characters into the sword's hilt. As the knight left the house, the blacksmith asked if the young man would use the blade soon. The young man said yes because he had been tasked with exterminating werewolves. Knowing Master Ricardo's skill, the man handed him his sword with a clear conscience and asked him to be kind to her. The knight nodded quickly. Stepping into the forest, the young man exhaled as the idea of being nice kept spinning in his head, and he still handled the weapon cautiously since it was a demonic sword not likely to be tamed by simply naming it. He thought the best option was to leave the blade in, though the monsters still looked frightening. 5 werewolves appeared this time, and the knight would have trouble handling them all at once. Again, the boy decided it might be better to draw his sword, even though the blade could put him at a greater disadvantage. One of the monsters spotted him and lunged, swinging its huge clawed paws. Ricardo dodged to the side and barely avoided the blow, but realized he was surrounded. Forced to draw his sword, the young man hesitated as the werewolf attacked again. The boy recalled the saying that a swordsman should be grateful for his weapon. The werewolves kept attacking, and another assault wounded the knight. A sword is a swordsman's soul. Give it a good name and it will shine. Surrounded on 3 sides, the man still hesitated, unsure what to do. Different from the fools who loved swords, he could not accept their obsession blindly, and doubts tore his mind apart. Then the man drew his blade, called him by name, and ordered him to cast a curse on the monsters. Their behavior began to change. With their heads thrown back, the werewolves let out heartbreaking cries of pain. Sharp claws tore at their muzzles. They bit into one another and tore flesh. The young man watched in horror. All the wolves lay dead, having wounded themselves and then killed their own comrades. Only one monster remained alive and attacked the knight standing nearby, who had to react immediately and swung to strike. A single swing of his sword cut the monster in half. Even he had not expected such an effect. It was clearly Sabaki's true power. At those words, the image of a demonic woman appeared behind him. Turning to the swordsman, the girl asked if she was really strong. Her face looked very sweet, with large, beautiful eyes and a faint smile, and the earlier frightening look had vanished. Ricardo was in deep inner turmoil. Many called him a hero, and all his achievements were his own, yet despite his mastery with weapons, he had little emotion. Now everything in his head was different, and the situation had left a mark on him. Meanwhile in the castle, the old man worried that what he had said to Ricardo the other day was unreasonable. He realized the boy was neither his subordinate nor his student. His companion tried to calm the anger, saying everyone handles a sword their own way, and the old man had the right to judge. The young man reassured the master not to worry, because Ricardo apparently liked his sword. He said the knight was resting at the inn after the mission and offered to visit him. They decided to drop in on the visit, and the old man said enthusiastically that the young man looked really surprised and asked if something had happened on the mission. Ricardo slept on the bed, hugging his weapon, and the guests thought it looked like a girl was lying beside him. Tubaki moved again while Gearhard stayed relaxed. Now the man looked like a sword fanatic. He did not want to become like that man. Everyone experiences ups and downs, and when some are in the spotlight, others find themselves out of it and fade into the shadows. Gerhardt sat at the table holding a mug, while someone kept knocking on his door asking for a man. The old man opened the door and saw Borubis Chiron standing before him. The master asked the guest what he needed. The man pointed to a box at Gerhardt's feet. It held 10 daggers Gerhardt had ordered earlier, and the blacksmith had just finished them and brought them in right away. After thanking Barubas for his service, the master asked him to deliver the order to Jozo, and the man gave the blacksmith 10 gold pieces as payment, saying it could be checked. After some time, Gerhardt noticed something strange. The guest had not left, and once again reminded the blacksmith that the work was finished and the blacksmith could go home, while Barubas hinted that the dagger had not hurt him either. The man added that the count had asked you to give him a gift because there was a rumor the hero often took credit for his achievements. If a man claimed credit, he should be rewarded. The blacksmith thought the man was eager to get his sword, but the old man said it was Barubas who was impatient. Gerhardt explained how Ricardo had received his sword and would not need a new one for some time, and the news crushed the blacksmith. As another of the master's subordinates worked on the box, the two continued to talk, and the man asked the old man how long it would last, but the old man's answer was disappointing, saying the hero might carry the sword for about 10 or 20 years or for the rest of his life. The guest kept complaining that his orders were running out. The situation looked grim, but he still believed everyone needed his swords. After all, they both had to be on the same side. The master replied curtly. This was not to help the blacksmith's shop or Baruba himself. He didn't order from him because the old man didn't need it. After that, he waved the guest toward the door so the guest could go home, and if the guest didn't leave willingly, he would be thrown out as a suspicious person. Before leaving, the man asked who would use the daggers he had brought, hoping the knights of the castle would take them, but that proved wrong, and the weapons were meant for the apprentice. Angered, the blacksmith realized his interlocutor did not understand what he was doing. The training taught that if you cannot control magic, the weapon can be destroyed. The door shut and Barubas stepped back, but he felt deep anger because the daggers that held his soul and heart could break easily, and Gerhardt would not care. Worried that the blacksmith had been told about the apprentice, the knight feared he would be offended. The old man didn't mean to put him down, he simply ordered from him because he knew he could forge swords strong enough for training. When he lifted the box lid, they were both surprised. The daggers were stunning, their silver ornamentation inlaid with precious stones. They might be Patrick's work because the pieces matched his style. The knight couldn't believe a job like that could be done for only 1 gold coin. The old man agreed. Gerhardt usually counted at least 3 gold coins to make a 10 gold profit. The blacksmith clearly acted unwisely. Making the count happy was his priority, regardless of profit, for the next job. He liked the dagger and thought it was excellent in its basic form, so praising the master for his work seemed appropriate. Gerhardt dropped the blade in disgust. To him, all weapons were utter nonsense. The man asked the knight if he remembered owning the demon's chrysword, since he loved waving it. The old man thought these blades should have felt the same, but none of them did. He was absolutely certain that any blade that did not stir the urge to kill was the wrong weapon. The young man felt slightly uneasy about the master's behavior. Because the men had known each other for a long time, he asked Gerhardt where they could meet Lord Barubas. The old man was displeased by the question and wondered why the young man had asked it at all. The knight had no such intention and thought there might be a special relationship between the acquaintances. The man could easily have said it, but he was ashamed. The young man smiled contentedly, eager to hear everything from the start. The master, confused, rubbed his eye and had nowhere to go. The knight asked Joe what he thought when he heard the words legendary sword, but the boy did not understand. After the knight explained, Joe felt admiration. The knight hesitated, then said it was a great sword passed down through generations. It sounded romantic. Gerhardt, a man who lives by the sword, should feel nothing but romance for the so-called legendary sword. The man shared a story from 40 years ago when he was still an adventurer. Together with 3 companions, he spent several years repeatedly facing the labyrinth that held the legendary sword. Everyone on the team believed finding the blade would bring them glory, but one man did not know exactly how many attempts it took to reach the dungeon. Luck favored the friend. Everything was going as they'd planned, so they couldn't miss the chance. Each of them thought exactly that. When they reached their destination, something was waiting in the darkest depths, and it filled the adventurers with horror. A gigantic, never-before-seen monster guarded the treasures, and even the men were terrified. No one in the group knew how to handle the monster at that moment, and they needed to run, but only the friends had no idea what they were getting into. The adventurers could not run away with the treasure so close, so they chose to fight, but the monster was strong and managed to grab the girl. Weak and blinded by greed, the humans charged the powerful enemy and soon faced the consequences. The Seekers fought with all their might but only ended up injured. Finally, they defeated the demon, but 2 of their comrades were killed. Seeing their friends' horrible corpses, the survivors realized how insignificant they were. To console his comrade, he reminded him they were fighting to win the legendary sword, and opening the chest would let them receive all the honors they deserved. He was certain his friends' deaths would not be in vain because they would become heroes. They approached the treasure, determined to finally see what kind of sacred weapon was there. The box held a rusty blade. It was a total disappointment. Their expectations and efforts were not rewarded. Even Shazel was surprised to find a bronze sword, and it turned out to be the legendary sword in the chest. The man asked the master if they had checked the lab rent in the archives. The master said yes. He decided the document was a fake. Gerhardt did not support his guests because the archives dated back centuries. Once people fought with stone axes and clubs. The bronze sword was a prized weapon unmatched in sharpness. Once the greatest weapon and hidden in the labyrinth, that ancient blade later could not even pierce an ordinary soldier's armor. Craftsmanship keeps improving, so a sword made hundreds of years ago is never as good as a modern one. Gerhardt and his friends were simply captivated by the idea of a legendary sword. Besides the unjustified find, they paid the price with the deaths of their comrades. At that moment, he destroyed the blade with a powerful swing, striking it against the stone. Besides Gerhardt, the only survivor was Barubas. Following the incident, both men quit adventuring, and the friend became a blacksmith. The old man became the sorcerer's apprentice, and each chose a path shaped by their bitter experience in the labyrinth. Barubas figured it didn't matter how much time passed. The legendary swords in the labyrinth couldn't be that bad. If you master the technique, you can make a weapon that will scare people hundreds of years from now. His friends believed they could build such a weapon themselves. He remembered it all with sadness. He stood up from the table, feeling he had gone too far. Josel, however, saw it differently. The young man quickly understood the master's passion for making weapons. Master Barubas showed the same enthusiasm as the old man, who chuckled that it had been that way 40 years ago. The old man added that, over time, his friend forgot how to improve his skills and became dull, making only simple things. All he cared about was protecting his master's position. The man was angry and doubted that this was really the legendary sword. Barubas was furious and tried to get information about the man who made the blade the Count was obsessed with, but the craftsman knew nothing and did not believe any of the other craftsmen could know such a person. The young man reminded the blacksmith that everyone was going to the guild meeting and warned that if the blacksmith was late, he would definitely lose his place. At the meeting, the chief foreman suggested, as usual, beginning by deciding how to distribute the work. A large order was already in place, so everyone gathered this month must work together on it. Barubas crossed his arms in annoyance. After all, he was the one who always handled the fair counts. Someone had taken them from him, and as a man he found it unforgivable. Whispers spread among the other craftsmen that Barubas had lost his job with the Count, and people openly mocked the blacksmith for losing his post to a stranger, yet that stranger held all the power. Pain tightened in his chest as he realized the situation had affected him far more than he expected, and he was surprised at himself. He was furious with them and did not need their pity because they had never shown it before. Shivering, the blacksmith was asked by another master why he had suddenly started sweating since his reaction seemed odd, and he replied there was nothing to worry about and everything was fine. Barubas went to see Patrick, who greeted him warmly and asked what had brought the master to him. The man wanted to know about the sword that had been given to the owner of the establishment himself. The young man began dancing around the workshop, constantly saying how good it was and how great a job had been done. Thrilled to be allowed to sew a dress and a cover for such a beautiful girl, he refused to lie to the guest, while the blacksmith grew furious at the evasive answers because he only wanted an answer and had not come to watch strange dances. Barubas wanted the blacksmith's name and to know if the sword had any inscription, but Patrick denied everything, saying they were not supposed to talk about such matters and that people have a right to privacy and a personal life. Coins spilled from the bag. The man stayed agitated, wanting to speak as one master to another, and it was unclear whether that amount was enough. The young man thoughtfully twirled a coin, showing the guests enthusiasm. The aim seemed to be communication, but he himself was not very concerned about it. At last he decided to tell, naming the sword the Crying Demon and the blacksmith Lutz. Burvis had never heard of such a thing and wondered if the guild had such a person. Patrick suggested that if such a person did exist, he probably lived behind the wall. The man was surprised. If the young man really was behind the wall, he would be a simple blacksmith. But that idea felt like nonsense. He could not see how the men behind the walls could make decent weapons if they could not even join the guild. Patrick clarified the problem was in the guild, then asked Barubas what the point of their existence was. Barubas was surprised by the sudden change. The blacksmith had to explain that the guilds existed to keep the distribution and sale of raw materials steady, to protect and train craftsmen, and that Baruba himself benefited. He agreed, though the last point was doubtful, and he chuckled, believing protecting and training new masters mattered most. Counting coins, the young man believed the system wasn't meant to protect artisans, but to protect masters. The guild limited how many people could be masters, so anyone who did well would immediately threaten a master's position, and Barubas grew nervous. Patrick kept reflecting on the master, who struggled to handle an experienced apprentice and told him to go to training, while the master himself remained unaware for many years. A boy thought Lutz was a good apprentice who had been kicked out of the guild, and the blacksmith found it funny. The young man did not really believe him. He thought Barubas was too casual with his students, talking about secret methods but in no hurry to teach them. That caution seemed unnecessary because a leak of the technology could destroy his workshop. Patrick suddenly leaned in toward the master's forehead and repeated the words about training artisans, showing that was the guild's purpose and that he had been right. Barubas's words clashed with his principles, so the young man began to doubt the guild's purpose and asked whether the man himself knew about his workshop's reputation. The blacksmith closed his eyes while the boy told him what people were saying, that many believed he had stopped taking new apprentices, and so there would be no future. Rumors spread that the establishment was a graveyard for artisans. The master grew increasingly uneasy, feeling both anger and irritation. His chest pain returned, and he denied everything as a lie, saying he was just making sure his apprentices were fed. Pain intensified, and the man began to tremble, confident in his approach, and showing his care through fair pay and training future masters, everything done solely for them. Patrick was surprised by the reaction, but quickly found a way out, and the idea that he simply brushed it off is a rumor. Turning away from the guest, he said he hoped everything would be fine, and not just fine but better than it would be for anyone else. Borobus still trembled, wondering who had spread the information, as the fake name, Graveyard of Craftsmen, kept running through his head and made his 40-year reputation seem like a graveyard. Refusing to accept this quietly, he called Wilson. The boy answered the call immediately. Among the blacksmith's apprentices, he was considered the best. The man asked him to use all his skill to forge a new sword. Curious, the young man wanted to know who the blade was meant for because he needed more details. The teacher refused, saying the weapon was not for sale. Borobus turned it into a test to see if the student could pass the promotion exam. Other workers overheard their conversations. Understanding the master's words, the boy promised to deliver his strongest blow and hurried away, while the other apprentices were surprised that all restrictions had been lifted. They talked about what had happened to Wilson. The boy was not getting any younger, and their master had finally chosen a successor. Some feared they would be held forever with no freedom to choose. Borobus reflected on 40 years of sword fighting and the skills he'd cultivated that now lived in his students' flesh and blood, and he wanted to believe his students could prove to him those years were not a mistake. Wilson worked hard on the task while his colleagues debated at lunch whether the master and apprentice would even take it on. It was unclear, but some believed he would complicate things again and end up losing. A few days later, Wilson finished and hurried to tell the teacher he had done everything he could with his technology and asked the teacher to take a look. Satisfied, the blacksmith held the beautifully crafted sword in his hands. The apprentice worried about his opinion, but the reaction remained unclear. The master closed his eyes tightly. Borobus knelt down with the blade still raised, and the boy feared something had happened to him. Lifting his head, his face wet with tears, he smiled as the young man tried to find out if the teacher was all right and how good the work was. The blacksmith praised the apprentice. The blade turned out very well, and the young man had done exactly as he was told, but there was something else about the sword. Nothing about it stood out. It was useless and completely standard, with no individuality, just a sharpened iron rod and a mere improved copy, and the student was shocked. Borobus regretted that the workshop's nickname was true, since he had been training mass producers who simply followed orders. Seeking his apprentice's forgiveness, he promised to teach the boy and the others all his skills from now on. Wilson didn't understand what was happening. The man explained the next steps, saying the student would have to test his sword again for strength and bring it to the next meeting to officially become a master. Once the Earl gave his seal of approval, the young man would immediately become the next master of the workshop. The blacksmith encouraged him as best he could, but Wilson was delighted by the unexpected change. The other apprentices were glad when they heard about the training. Borobus knew he was not meant to be a master and only wanted to get better and make fine swords. After becoming master, he was only trying to protect his position, and his memories show him constantly yelling at his subordinates. He took a deep breath. No longer a master, he felt freer than ever, but he still had to decide what to do. He wanted to swing a sword, not just attack, but to become a better version of himself. Later in the tavern, Borobus met Gerhardt, and the old man asked if he was causing trouble again, so Borobus asked his friend to introduce him to a blacksmith named Lutz. The friends spent the evening talking quietly, and Gerhardt was surprised at how easily his comrade gave up the title of master, saying the man had been too stubborn and should have done it long ago. Sipping his mug contentedly, the man said he had not retired either. The old man chuckled. That was bad for an apprentice. He remained convinced his friend had called about the problems that had come up. Borobus repeated his earlier request, saying he wanted to meet Lutz, which visibly surprised his interlocutor. A young man's face popped into his memory, and he began to worry, fearing the blacksmith might have decided to hand the boy over to the guild or something like that. The master quickly assured that the option with the guild had nothing to do with it, only the meeting mattered to him. The man had to learn blacksmithing from him, and his friend looked completely confused. He really didn't understand how it was supposed to work, because his comrade wanted to learn new skills after leaving his post, and the master apparently thought he could just come to him and be taught. Borobus punched his chest and got ready to offer to teach his skills in return, hoping it would interest the young man. Gerhardt thought Mr. Lutz was very young and couldn't understand why someone of a different age would bow to him, but the master didn't care. The blacksmith enjoyed their work. They became a master at about 20. The old man was pleased when the young apprentices shouted at them. It seemed his friend had prepared thoroughly. After that, the old man agreed to go himself and asked the young man to cooperate because the master relied on him completely. Later, the men visited Lutz. He was beaming and had not expected to be offered a technical exchange. Hart asked again whether the man was truly ready to make such a deal, since he could lose his equipment if he did. Scratching his head, the young man replied, the problem was he could not do business inside the city walls. Owning a monopoly on technology would serve no purpose. He was also interested in Baruba's skills. Excited at the chance to be useful, he promised he would spare no effort to share everything he knew. The other man thanked him but added something else. He still considered himself the best at sharing instructions for making a sword. The guests considered his words, and even the old man admitted the blacksmith had achieved great success. Borubus rose from the table. The man bowed and asked Mr. Lutz to teach him the instructions. Mr. Lutz extended his hand. To him, it was a mutually beneficial collaboration. They shook hands to seal the agreement. They forged 2 swords. The first proved too powerful magically. The second was too weak and its magic failed to take hold. The boy apologized as soon as he was made to test what he'd learned, and the dagger and the gem were broken. Gerhardt burst into laughter at the scene. The master told his disciple not to worry. For a practitioner, jewels are expendable. From now on, he would have to grind dozens of those stones to dust. Shouting at Josel, the old man told him to stop being afraid. No matter how expensive the jewels looked, they were only stones if fear ruled him. That meant he had no place among the masters, so the old man urged him not to be afraid and not to give up. Minutes later, the young man made another blade with his last strength, and the teacher examined it carefully, poked it into the object to test it, and it gradually began to smoke. A bright flame flared when the weapon touched it, and the master was pleased that his student had created a fire dagger. If it takes too long to light, the weapon would be unusable in combat, and the old man would not do that. The old man said fire can be applied to only one dagger. Many adventurers want to try it. The fire attribute is the most versatile. This sold for as much as 15 gold coins. Josel was surprised. It proved quite profitable. The man laughed and said that to make money from the spells he might need 2 or 3 more, but for now, he did not need to worry about it. He reminded the trainee that the training wasn't over and he needed to continue. Watching the apprentice work, Gerhardt decided it was time to hammer the skills into him, convinced a diligent person could learn, and he looked to the window wondering if he was doing it right, unlike Josel. I wanted to see how well Borubus could master new skills, while the master studied diligently, watching Lutz at work. Tamahagin is the powder used to make swords, and it is processed, hammered, and straightened. Beat the rolled tamahagin with a mallet into 2-centimeter squares, then split it into small pieces, and use low-carbon soft iron for the core and hard iron for the skin. Next, the steel is stacked and heated. Selected tamahagin is stacked on the lever plate. Processed steel balls are also stacked on the plate. Next, heat everything together and fold it into one lump. Rub the edge to remove impurities. Make a notch with a hammer, flip it over and strike it again, then repeat about 8 times for wrought iron and about 15 times for leather. Next, the wrought iron is wrapped in an iron skin and forge welded by heating and hammering the 2 pieces together into a single piece. They then hammer it into a rod and shape it into a sword. Repeatedly hammering the iron core creates multiple layers on the sword. The sword's strength comes from 2 metals in the core iron that give it both hardness and resistance to breaking. Borubus was surprised that the sword seemed to come to life, and at first he did not understand what the man was talking about. Then I realized the old master had also been bringing his products to life for years. In his youth, Baruchus believed he would deliver every sword blow with the same sincerity as the young man, because he always wanted to do better. Pleasure filled him, and the intense urge he once had to forge swords returned. A girl who was an assistant looked into their workshop and said she had brought tea. Noticing the old master sweating heavily, she suggested taking a break. The young man noticed the same thing and agreed it was worth resting. The blacksmith refused to be persuaded, saying he was fine and had enough strength for this, and he was eager to learn something new from the young master. His face was sullen, but the assistant smiled and said the man really loved swords. The other apprentices watched with interest, curious if the new man was an apprentice too. They decided the master would teach the newcomer. The men grew increasingly surprised by all the help. Those 2 seemed to be having a lot of fun together. Sadness came over the boys as they realized Borubus was no longer the man who had taught them. Their former master had brought a stranger and was now amusing himself with him. Wilson watched from the sidelines, and the man felt the old master should leave because he had already stepped down, but if he kept showing up at the workshop, it would sow doubts about who the real master was there. On the cliff edge, the old friends looked out as Gerhardt asked his comrade what he thought of Lutz's skills and whether the experience had been useful. The man's face showed he was pleased with the result. This technique was fascinating, a world of swords that were similar but not identical, so a master never had time to be bored. Gerhardt couldn't believe these were the words of a man who had been sulking at everyone until recently, and his friend told him to shut up. The blacksmith was content. Probably it just meant he only had to finish washing and then suddenly grew angry. It may have been hard, but nothing was wasted. Raising his fists toward him, the man felt excited and jubilant, now one with heaven, earth, and God, and kept laughing heartily. The friend kept his feelings to himself, angry that the master was so out of breath and doubting the master's ability to forge a new sword, while the blacksmith insisted he could make a better blade. According to Buruba himself, Lutz called himself the best and was certainly self-confident, but in fact he kept creating irreplaceable swords. The old man thought their whole company were fools for believing they could become heroes with a single bronze sword. Gerhardt suggested that once it was all over, they should visit the graves of their dead friends. The master was surprised because none of them had graves. Jokingly, he said he would go to the labyrinth and lay flowers, but the old man did not object. Their squabble escalated. The blacksmith pointed out the labyrinth's complexity and feared he could not reach its depths. His friend said they had already passed it once, but there was no certainty people their age could do it. Barubas thought putting his homemade sword in the treasure chest would make it better than the bronze one. Gerhardt asked them not to make him look too good, or he would later regret leaving. His comrades snorted and laughed loudly. The man held an ancient-looking object that should have been a katana, but had turned into a piece of burnt iron, and the smell was unbearable. The blacksmith knew he must not show this work to Gerhardt, because Gerhardt would laugh at it, and his dead friends would appear as ghosts. The master's mood sank as he looked sadly at his failed katana, realized it was not the same as a real sword, and feared his 40 years of experience were useless. Studying the iron pieces in the wooden bucket, he lifted one closer. He decided he could not abandon what he had started, so he tried again and again until he succeeded and took up the task with steady effort. The apprentices only watched him from the side. The young masters were likely angry that the former boss was trying something new and even took pleasure in forging. Work continued, and once again the piece looked like an iron rod instead of a katana, and the next attempt also failed because it seemed to have the right shape at first but later split in two, so they thought about how to prevent the split. He spoke and the blacksmith wrote everything down, careful not to miss a word. Day turned to night, and at last it was possible to see the result. On the master's side, he was sweating heavily out of habit. The katana came out looking quite presentable. That level of work was fine for a beginner and would be enough to cut down goblins. The man felt pleased with himself. His reflection in the blade reminded him of the time he forged a sword himself. For the first time, the master felt as if he had created something legendary. He wanted to craft such a weapon with his own hands. Harubis even joked about putting his katanas in every box since they were still better than bronze swords. He decided not to tell Gert because the blacksmith himself had worked with the staff for decades and should also be able to make a good katana. Although he needed a break, the master focused all his orders on the matter and immediately took on the fifth. Once more blows rang on the iron as the old master worked busily in the workshop. After more hard work, he finally thought he could hear the iron breeze. The form it took matched the katana image Barubas wanted to create. A premonition told him a masterpiece would be born. He wanted to see the blades shine and the finished work, to witness its amazing sharpness. Nothing distracted him. Peace settled over him, maybe even happiness. Then blood flowed from his mouth, and the blacksmith began to cough. The process amazed him so much that his heart felt ready to jump out of his chest, and it was beating hard as his blood rushed. The blacksmith promised Gerhardt he would soon see what they had been eager to find. Boruba would make it with his own hands. The legend did not come true. He raised the hammer for one last blow but could not hold on any longer. The man began to fall backward, and that was the end of his journey. A large crowd came to say goodbye to the former master, including friends and former apprentices. People behind him whispered that the blacksmith had died while working, and that an apprentice who came to the workshop had found him that morning. A girl brought flowers to Borubas to honor his memory as he rested peacefully in his coffin, and despite his parents' objections, he remained a blacksmith until the very end. Following tradition, flowers were released into the river after the man died while forging a blade, and the assistant prayed quietly as Gerhardt and Lutz looked at the water. Someone handed the young man a long bundle, and he was surprised. The old man said that, in Arborabasa, he held a katana in his hands. That fool never finished the blade and should have stopped, but he was too obsessed. Handing the weapon to the blacksmith, the man asked him to finish what he'd started. The blacksmith was surprised to be asked since the master usually did that work, but he agreed. The student also refused the katana and knew nothing about swords, so the old man could use it as he wanted, and even the deceased was not very good with that kind of weapon. With all his heart, the old blacksmith wanted to finish the job, but it didn't work out, and he was partly to blame. I took the package, Mr. Gerhardt, since I had entrusted it to the master, and everything that happened was because of how he lived as a blacksmith. The young man took on the task of finishing the work because it was his life's work and very important to him. Surprised, the young man found the blade was already 80% complete, with only hardening and polishing left. They say the order determines the blade's sharpness. If you oil it and lower it, the blade will crack. The process is complex and leaves no room for error. The master lowered the blade into water. An unpolished blade makes its quality hard to judge, but the blacksmith felt certain, and since Barupus had not given his life, the master began polishing in vain. What I received is truly a masterpiece. When the blacksmith finished his work, he handed the katana to Gerhardt, confident everything was ready and eager to give the weapon a name. The girl suggested the name Aitsu, and the others asked what it meant. She said the designation meant a sword that thirsts for power, forged by a man who thirsts for power too. Confidently holding the weapon, the old man regarded Tetsu with a kind expression. He liked it and promised his friend he would always use it as his favorite sword from then on. The blade was heavy because the craftsman made it too long. The old man pictured his friend laughing at his problem and advising him to make the sword lighter and shorter. Pushing the thought aside, he told the image to be quiet since the weapon was already his. He refuses to have it shortened because his body needs to get used to the blade. Gerhardt was looking for a suitable place to train. A rock appeared on his path. Surprised, he decided to keep looking elsewhere. The man saw the blacksmith's image again, and Borubus challenged him to show the full power of his Aitsu. He took a deep breath, dropped his bag, and accepted the challenge, knowing a sword is not a tool for cutting stones. 3 words filled his mind: useless, meaningless, and careless. Too clumsy to wield a katana, he swung his sword to show off his skills. He cut through the rock while the blade stayed intact, and the old man was delighted because it proved to be a magnificent sword. Gerhardt felt younger than before, and this was the best result he had ever shown. He proudly raised his weapon, his favorite, the legendary sword. The man hoped that Barubus had seen everything.